You're listening to the Real Estate Runway Podcast, powered by QUATTRO CAPITAL, where we are all about alternative business and investment strategies to help you amplify life and maximize wealth. Here's your host, the recovering engineer turned multifamily investor, Chad Sutton.
All right, Real Estate Runway family. Today we have a very special guest. I have to tell you, when I recorded this episode, I was so surprised at where it actually went. I thought this was someone doing horizontal land development. No, this is someone who is finding infill development land ready for shovel build, ready to go vertical and build, and marketing them to large behemoth builders, which is fantastic. So you'll hear some analogies along the way. Let's get into it. It's a really cool way to make short-term profits. And it seems like the risk profile is pretty low. I'll be vetting this personally because I do think we're going to put some money from Quattro's perspective into this. So stay tuned. Feel free to reach out and follow up on my research. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Folks, if you get any value out of the show, pay it forward. All right. The only way to find more people like you is to leave a review, leave the 5-star review and thoughtful comment, like us, subscribe on YouTube. It's the only way we grow, right? We're not asking for anything other than pay it forward. Okay. And other than that, if you want to be on the show, come on. I'd love to have you. The quattroway.com/podcast is the way to do it. Love to have you on. And if you want to just email us, podcast@thequattroway.com. We are happy to hear from you, here for episode requests, anything you guys want. But we love knowing you're out there, right? So we do read all the comments. We read all the emails. Many of them come to me personally. So love to hear from you. Appreciate you listeners. And last thing, if you guys want to find us on social media, Team Quattro Capital, one word, no special characters, or just visit us at thequattroway.com. And I lied. One more thing. If anyone is still looking to invest with us, we are actively pursuing opportunistic deals right now with the market where it is. Hit us at thequattroway.com/invest. Let's have a conversation, get to know each other, and see if we're a good fit. And now on to your scheduled production. All right. Real Estate Runway family, welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Runway Podcast. This is your captain speaking in the airplane analogy. I'm going to see if I can get used to that. We'll see how it goes, but you guys can try it on with me. Post in the comments if you don't like that or think that was cheesy as hell. But if not, I'm going to be, this is your captain speaking going forward. I think I like it. We're going to try it on for size. I'm here today with a good friend, Dan Haberkost, with Front Range Land. And we have a pretty interesting topic related to land deals that we're going to talk about today. So Dan, welcome to the show, brother. How you doing?
Chad, I'm great. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting.
You know, this episode's been a long time coming, folks. And I'm so fortunate that guests like Dan, whose time is so valuable, is willing to wait as long as they do to get on this show. So again, thank you for being patient with us. And I'm so excited to get into this today, Dan. Before we get into the episode, the meat of what you do, tell me who you are. What's your background? Where'd you come from? Why in the world do you think land is a sexy way to invest in real estate? Let's start with all the things, man.
Sure. I live in Colorado Springs, but I'm not from here. I'm originally from Ohio. Grew up in a rural town outside of Cleveland by about 50 minutes. I joke I grew up in a cornfield, but it's not really a joke. I pretty much grew up in a cornfield in Ohio. And anyways, so came from a very blue collar family. No one ever had their own business. Everyone just worked themselves to death. And I had a bunch of older siblings and cousins. And so I watched them follow the same path. And I was not going to do that. From a young age, I said, no, I'm not doing that. And so I started working pretty young. And through high school, I managed someone else's business the last couple of years. And then I did my own landscaping business on the side. And then in college, worked full time. Ended up running someone else's landscaping business for the last couple of years while going to school full time. And it was around 20 years old that I was pretty frustrated. I had been working nonstop from a pretty young age along with school. So I didn't have a whole lot of fun in high school or college. However, I had some semblance of self-awareness. And so I realized, all right, I know how to manage people. I know how business works. I know how to sell things. So how do I take this and apply this to some sort of business of my own as I finish school and have a whole bunch of extra time? And so I started reading different books, investing, stocks, business, so on and so forth. And everybody else, it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That was like the light bulb moment. So real estate it is. And bought a duplex there shortly after as just a house hack. This is in Parma, Ohio. I still own that today. And I didn't want to stay there. I wanted to move. The weather's horrible. There's nothing to do. And so long story short, I ended up moving out to Colorado. Love the sun, the mountains, and bought another house hack. And it was around that time that I realized the low and no money down stuff is great for maybe a property or two, but realistically, investing is something you do once you have money, right? You can start active businesses without a lot of money, but actual true investing is something for people with money. So I thought, a $60,000, $70,000 a year job is not going to cut it. How do I scale my income right now? What sort of active business can I start? And again, another fairly long conversation, but I met an investor here at the local real estate group, which I actually host now, who had been doing land and development for the last 40 plus years all over the country and even some internationally. And I would drive an hour south every weekend to Pueblo, West Colorado, for anyone familiar with the Front Range out here, and learn from him, work for him, help him in his business. And eventually I started participating by finding land for the builds for him and then actually going through the builds with him. And that's really where I learned and got into this space. And eventually that's where Front Range Land came from. I simply took his business model and implemented it myself. And so Front Range Land is the active day-to-day business. And I misuse the word investing all the time where I say land investing, but it's not investing. The investing is the rentals that I buy, which I have continually bought a few rentals here and there over the years. And so the active Front Range Land feeds the passive, and then the passive helps to shelter the active. But quite simply, if you think of just a giant marketing funnel for land, going direct to seller, buying at 30 to 55 cents on the dollar, all of that we take and make money off of in a variety of ways, sometimes just selling for cash, sometimes selling on terms, and then a few at a time, I'll put new construction homes or duplexes on. And so that's where I'm at today. I'm 27, and although I'm fairly young, I feel like I've been doing this a long time.
I also have been a young investor operator. I'm 35 with 2 kids now. And so I get that sentiment. You feel like you've probably lived like 4 lifetimes already just in what you've learned, and you've probably forgotten more than many will ever know, right?
Sure. Yeah, that's relatable. Definitely.
I love it, dude. I love it. And by the way, what is the hometown in Akron or in Ohio?
Medina, Ohio.
Medina. Okay. I didn't know if you were going to say Akron or not. I know one other person in my entire repertoire from Akron, but
it's not far. My aunt lives in Akron. I was there quite a bit as a kid.
Very good. Very good. And I'll drop this here. You don't know a guy named Eric Yusko, do you?
No, it doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, I didn't know. So he's a big life coach now, man of class. Great. Yeah, I've actually done a podcast series with them. So folks, if you remember that, go check out Man of Class, Eric Yusko. I've done I think a whole season with him, and he's been on here a few times. But anyway, that would have been funny if y'all were connected. So it just sometimes.
Sure.
But anyway, great state of Ohio. Spent some years there myself. Let's talk a little bit about, so you mentioned your investing, which is your rentals. And so we'll put that to the side unless we want to come back to it. But let's talk about what in the world you do with land. What does Front Range Land do? How do you help investors? It sounds like there's some investment opportunity. What are some ways you use land to turn a profit?
Sure. So an important distinction to make right off the bat, I hear the word raw in the context of land misused all the time. A lot of people just see dirt and they think that's raw land. Could be. And so to make an easy example, or use an easy example, out east of Colorado Springs, if you go a ways out, you run into old farmland and old farms, and that is raw land. There's no development. It's not titled for anything. There's just endless acreage without streets and roads, utilities, so on and so forth. Raw land. On the flip side, you come into an existing metro or subdivision, and you might have a street where there's 10 houses, but then there's 3 lots still in between a lot of the houses. And the word I'm alluding to is infill. Infill land is not raw. It is horizontally developed. And what I mean by that, utilities are in place, right? The work has been done to subdivide and plat each parcel individually, and you can go put whatever the zoning allows there on it, whether it's a house or multifamily or commercial. And so that is shovel ready or horizontally developed land. And that's what I focus on. So important distinction. A lot of people in the land space go after actual raw acreage. I don't touch it. Nothing wrong with it. It's just not my niche.
I'm ready to hear more here. Let's keep going. This is a niche.
Okay. And that really came about because the guy who taught me this was building houses. And so if you're going to build a house, shovel ready dirt is a lot easier than trying to go do all the horizontal work. So just a quick aside there. Now, from there, it's a really inefficient space. So let's use D.R. Horton as an example, one of the biggest builders in the country. They're buying a lot from me in Cape Coral right now. They don't have a competent, that's the wrong word. Their business is building homes. Finding land is not easy for them. And so they have plenty of big developers they work with who do entire subdivisions for them. But they want to build in Cape Coral and Lehigh Acres and Palm Bay and Palm Coast and all these places where there are already subdivisions that were done, but much of it was not built out. And they don't have any easy way to go and get a large amount of lots in those existing subdivisions. So it's very inefficient is the point that I'm making. And you have all these people, especially in Florida, North Carolina, Colorado, who bought land in these subdivisions decades ago, and they were going to move out west or move down south. And for whatever reason, it just didn't happen. And so they've been sitting on it for years. They bought it for pennies on the dollar. And so I'm trying to paint the overarching picture here. Point being, you have a lot of people with an asset they're never going to use that they bought for nothing a long time ago. Most of these people are financially well off. I'll tell you, our seller, our avatar is not distressed. It is most often upper middle class to wealthy and apathetic. And then you have...
And apathetic. I love that.
Yeah, apathetic about money. I'm serious. Yeah, it's amazing. And then on the flip side, you have all these big builders that need lots, but that's not their specialty. And so filling that gap is a great way to make money with infill land. And so quite simply, via mail and cold calling, but mostly mail, we go to direct to seller to acquire land off market at a big discount. And again, it's all infill. So it's usually a quarter to a half of an acre. I think the largest lot I've ever bought was 2.5 acres in Larkspur, Colorado. Still infill, it's just bigger parcels. And many of them we just flip to builders, whether it's D.R. Horton or just a mom and pop builder. And then a small portion at a time, I'll have a contractor put a new build on and sell it off. So it's a really simple business model. But the point that I'm trying to make is it's just very inefficient. It's fractured and inefficient.
So if I can venture an analogy, like I love the need you just described, right? Because, and I had you all wrong. I would have assumed you were a raw land acquire, get it horizontally developed and sell it, which there are people that do that too. And that's hard. Oh, yeah. It can take 2 years to get something horizontally developed.
Yeah. So plenty of my friends do that. And it's not a business I'm excited about.
Yeah, it's hard. And it's uncertain and diligence is months. Anyway, but I guess to make an analogy, y'all have heard me say this analogy before in different contexts, but a lion can, in theory, hunt mice, and it can kill a mouse and eat a mouse, but it's almost like a human being eating celery trying to live. The lion will expend more calories and energy hunting and killing a mouse than it will get calories off of the mouse itself. But a lion can, if you hand it a platter of 50 mice, it can sit there and eat them and do just fine on a caloric intake. So it's like, you think about the need. He's saying, look, these big lion companies who build at massive scale, they can go get big parcels of land with a bunch of mice on it. They're capable of holding a bunch of mice and they can eat that or get it from a developer or something like that. But they can't necessarily go find available infill lots in 1s, 2s, 3s, 10s, whatever, because they will expend more resources trying to find them than it will bring them value, which is it. So enter what you're talking about. And then the other side of that need is you have, and maybe you describe this for me. So describe your seller a little more. So is your seller someone who inherited land, or do they habitually own it? Like, how do they find themselves with a property that's shovel ready? Let's talk about that in a little bit.
So again, I always like to paint the big picture. So in the 60s and 70s, and I'm not entirely sure why it specifically seems to be those 2 decades, there were a lot of subdivisions done all over Florida, the Carolinas, Colorado, and then they were marketed to people in the cold parts of the country, right? So in New York and Ohio and up there, they marketed Lehigh Acres and a lot of those sort of subdivisions to people up north. Come down here where it's warm and nice, and same idea out here west. And so all kinds of people, a lot of baby boomers, or even the generation before the baby boomers, which I'm blanking on the name, bought these in the coming decades, but they didn't get built out, or maybe they just got 10%, 15% built out. So you have these subdivisions where all that horizontal work was done, but most of it is just vacant land. And from those original subdivisions, these sellers a lot of times bought, but building a house is a big endeavor for someone that's not in the business, even hiring a contractor to do it. And so many of them never moved, right? They were sold the dream, but it just sat there. And so here we are decades later, they're still sitting on it. Or they're a small developer, they're a builder that bought a few of those lots, built most of them out, has a couple left. Or it's the kids of either one of those who inherited it. So it's those three, right? It's the mom and pop that just bought for themselves. It's the builder who has a few lots left and built all of them out from their days. They're retiring now, or it's the kids that inherited it. And in all three scenarios, it's rarely distress. I've really changed our marketing, especially our mailers, where people come from housing or apartments and they're used to distressed, motivated sellers. And so they try and use that sort of verbiage on the mailers and on their cold calling scripts. And We just have not found that to be the seller. It tends to be an older person most of the time, unless it's the kids. And if it's the kids, they're still usually 40s or 50s. And they're getting these all the time, the mail and the cold calls, and they've owned it for decades and decades. And what they want is legitimacy. And so right on our mailer, it says, tired of fake offers? We send proof of funds. Here's our title agent. They handle escrow, so you don't have to worry. These people are so targeted for scams. That is their biggest motivation. Just, is this person legitimate? That is what they want to know. And so that's what we really focus on with everything we do, from frequently asked question sheets I have for my guys to send out, to just detailed SOPs and processes that show that we're legitimate, and then along with just sending proof of funds.
Nectar understands that raising capital is labor and time intensive, and we exist to solve that problem for you. Nectar provides fast, flexible, cash flow-based financing for experienced rental owners and operators. Whether you need cash for acquiring properties, portfolios, or you simply need it for ROI-generating renovations or expansion of staff, Nectar has your back. Grab your 12-month P&L with debt service and click the link in the show notes below to apply today.
That's super interesting. And I just learned something. I had no idea that many infill lots were probably held by families or kids of families who were sold a dream, never followed up on it for whatever reason. I can see how you would horizontally develop and then wait till you're ready to move down there. I'll do it next year, because developing is hard. So that makes sense. And in your acquisition of these sellers, and it sounds like you have some very targeted markets where these are prevalent just because of what was done in the 60s and 70s. What do you think, what does your typical avatar require in terms of touches? Like, how long does it take you to, you have to send them 10 letters? Do you have to call them? Like, honestly, if I get a letter in the mail, usually it goes straight in the trash, because I know it's probably someone looking for a motivated seller, which I am not. And it's someone who probably can't even get the deal done at the terms I want them to. Or my third thing is, it's going to be a lowball offer anyway, so why bother? How do you get them to like actually care and take you seriously?
Yeah, it's okay. So I wish I was doing this at a big enough scale to really have true averages. I think this conversation is often had where people throw out numbers where they just don't really understand statistics. So I'm sending 10,000. I'm just being straightforward, man. I'm sending 10,000 mailers a month to a bunch of different markets. I'm really not getting a true average there. And so it's all over the board as far as follow-up. And so sometimes we'll send mailers, we'll get a deal 3 weeks later. And then on the flip side, many deals 5-6 months of consistent follow-up, and then we get it. We just got one of our best deals ever this month, and my acquisition guy, had been working on it since November. And so I don't have a great average for you there, because again, at 10,000 mailers a month to a dozen different markets, looking back on the course of a year and quantifying it, I think I can get a good average, but month to month, not really. It's not a high enough volume. If I was sending 1 million mailers a month, sure, then I could give you really real averages. But
that kind of makes sense. It makes sense, Dan, before we go on, because like you think about the avatar you just described, you have to hope you get lucky and get their attention, right? And so it's like, probably that goes in the trash most of the time, but for whatever reason, on Tuesday, 6 months later, that person decided to look at it. And so it makes sense, because the person you're talking to is busy. They probably don't care. They probably aren't thinking about selling the lot. They probably forgot they had it in a lot of cases. So anyway, make your point you were going to make.
Yeah, the point I wanted to make is it's just a matter of being ever present, both for your mailers, so the people you haven't talked to yet, and then for the leads you've gotten but you didn't close. And yeah, I had a market here in Colorado that was really producing for years and years. And so I probably sent 20-some mailers to every landowner there over the course of 26 or 28 months, a little over 2 years. And we would continually get deals because, again, just the day that person decided they do want to sell, they said, we've gotten 12 mailers or 20 mailers in Front Range land, let's call them. And then on the flip side, too, we get leads all the time where maybe they're not by any means offended by our offer, but we'll just keep it. We put them in the long-term follow-up and follow up once or twice a month, or just, you never know what the scenario is. But assuming the conversation went well and they're a real seller and they just don't want to sell on the market with the realtor, which I have my guys push them towards. The takeaway is a powerful sales negotiating technique. But assuming that's the case, we just follow up, and you never know. One day, if you keep following up, when they want to sell, they'll sell to you.
That's very interesting. And it's curious because you might think, You just never know when you're going to strike the mood right. And it might be they just stroked a property tax check. This is irritating. Florida taxes went up 2x this year. Why am I holding this thing? You could just have to strike the mood and the pain point. So it's super interesting. So Dan, let's pivot a little bit because we're pretty far into this episode. Let's get to the what's in it for investors, because it sounds like, you have a way to acquire these lots probably at a reasonably low price and then sell them for top dollar to people who want them and really don't care about what their basis in the land is. They're looking at what they can sell the finished product for and go do that in bulk. What's in it for investors? Tell me how you work with private equity to get deals done.
Sure. Yeah, I'm working on pulling more of my own cash out of the business. All my older friends who have a lot more money and experience than me are telling me to stop keeping so much of my own cash in the business. I'll always have some. And so I've had a number of investors that are just funding deals for me and I've done it a couple different ways depending on what they want. Some I just pay a set interest rate every month. And then some of them, I don't pay anything every month and they just take a portion of the profit when the deal closes. So there's a lot of different ways we can set that up depending on what the person wants, how much they want to be involved or not involved. So that just depends. But yeah, the sales, relative to any normal investment, the sales cycles tend to be pretty darn quick on these things. So it tends to be a good arrangement for everyone involved.
Yeah, that's really good. So give me an example. Let's say I'm like, hey, I got 100 grand I want to go put to work. This sounds intriguing. I like the notion, especially if you're talking about places in Florida. I know the building frenzy is still crazy there. People are still moving that way. So how would you said interest rate or maybe an equity split? Like, how does it work?
Sure. An easy example, they fund a land deal if we're just flipping it and then take 20% of the profit. And they can easily get a solid return that way. I've had a couple people just give me chunks of cash at a high single digit interest rate, but that's more people that know me pretty well. So I wouldn't expect that from someone I'm just meeting.
Yeah. Just, hey, keep the money working. That makes a lot of sense. And folks, if you're not a math nerd, what that means is a good chunk of profits, short-term time frame, which means IRR is probably through the roof. So tell me this though, what is how does it go wrong for an investor? Is there a possibility of not getting return of capital? We can talk about that in rental real estate. How do you get in trouble in most real estate? You run out of time and you run out of money. You have a loan that comes due, you have to sell short, you run out of cash, you get the property repossessed. Like there's things you can tangibly say there. So how does it go wrong for an investor, or does it?
Yeah, specifically in my business, the worst thing that's happened is it sold for lower and we didn't get as good of a return. But I'll be straightforward with you. I've only ever lost money on one deal in several hundred deals, and it was a spec house where everything went wrong. I've never lost money on just a land flip. I'm sure I will over time. That's inevitable over hundreds and hundreds of thousands of iterations eventually. Yeah, so far the biggest thing that's gone wrong is just not making as much as intended on some of these land flips. And when you buy at a big enough discount, it's really hard to lose because you can always just drop the price to, if you bought it at 50 cents on the dollar, to 70 cents on the dollar or 65 cents on the dollar. So I would say probably the worst thing that ever happened. And thankfully, I didn't have any investor money in any of these lots, but one of my markets shut down all new water taps with absolutely no warning. And so that was a rough day. That's one of my horror stories where I owned a bunch of land there and then suddenly you couldn't build anything on any of them. Yeah, that's a fun story. I'm flying home from Florida, had a great vacation with my girlfriend, and I have a layover in, I think it was DC. And as soon as we land, my phone blows up. Everyone I know doing business in Pueblo in Colorado is suddenly calling and texting me. And it turns out with no warning at all, they shut down all new water taps without any indication as to what's going to happen. Are they going to open it back up? So in that moment, I'm sitting there wondering, is all of my land, because I had about a dozen lots there at the time, worthless? Some I was going to build on, some I was just flipping, some were under contract to sell already. And of course, those guys backed out immediately. And so 2 years later, or a year and a half later, I can tell you after a few weeks, a month, they said, okay, we are going to open this back up at a higher price for water and sewer taps. And then there's a limited amount left. So that land didn't end up becoming worthless. And I did still get it sold at a lower price. I did a couple more builds there. But yeah, that was probably the worst thing I've ever had happen because that was a big punch in the face.
And that's great to know because look, we're all investors. We're all trying to get asymmetric risk, that is lower downside, higher upside. And it sounds like there was really no way you could have prepared for this or no, it's no different than COVID, right? But did you have any lessons learned? Anything you can mitigate on that risk?
Just diversification. That was probably the biggest thing is I had too much concentrated in one market because that was out of the blue. Unless you were in the government, the Pueblo West Metro District. You couldn't have known that. And so for anyone investing or looking at land out west, this is a common problem. I think Phoenix just shut down additional water taps. Fountain, Colorado, if you own a lot that's not big enough for well and septic and you don't have water rights, you're screwed as of now. There's no water taps available. So just something to be aware of out west.
Do you manage multiple legal entities? Is your data scattered across various unsecure systems? Is your team spending too much time on manual processes? Do you struggle to meet reporting deadlines? Simplify entity management and compliance with Entity Keeper. Entity Keeper helps easily manage entities, build and maintain complex organizational charts, and track filing deadlines, all in one secure, cloud-based platform. And with automated alerts and centralized document storage, you'll stay 2 steps ahead of compliance deadlines. Click the link in the show notes to learn more and book a demo.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that level of experience. And now if you're ready, I'd love to go to the Quattro questions before we get out of here and learn a little more about you, if you don't mind.
Let's do it.
All right, question number 1. So Dan, tell me, what is your superpower? I think I heard some of it throughout the episode, but what's your superpower and how does it serve you?
Speaking succinctly and eloquently, as if I'm much older than I am, is something I've been able to do from a young age. And that is useful in motivating, driving, and directing other people.
That's fantastic. And a huge, important piece of building any company. So fantastic. But let's take the flip side of the coin, Dan. Give me your biggest failure. It could be life or business. And what'd you learn from it?
Ooh, biggest failure, when I really think about it, is just extreme fear-based thinking and a scarcity mindset that has limited progression. Because when I look back at some of my numbers from years ago, as far as what it would take to go get a deal under contract, and I was so small-minded and should have spent a lot more and sent a lot more mail and done a lot more marketing. And it took a long time to get out of that thinking, and still by no means perfect, but much better, where for a long time, I don't think in my mind, spending $1 on marketing was any different than just spending $1. I didn't get the concept of that being an investment I'm going to make a return on. And so that has held me back. I know I'm young, but I could be much, much further ahead if I had not been so small-minded in that regard.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And an abundant mindset in business and personal dealings, it's incredibly important and hard to come by. It's almost like describing, and I keep going back to that Man of Class series now because of this. It's like, we talk about it there. It's like trying to define the Force to someone who doesn't understand Star Wars. Use the Force. What the hell is mindset? What the hell is abundant mindset? So I loved that lesson. And it's not something you have, it's something you're always working on. So that's fantastic. Let's go to question number 3. You've got a podcast launching where you're going to talk, I assume, about this kind of stuff. Tell me about that and where can the listeners find it?
Absolutely. So it's the Big Picture Blueprint. Will be launching by the end of July. And myself and a friend who comes from the corporate world, but is now in the same space, will be talking all things land, real estate, and business in general, both with each other, and then interviewing just high-level people who own businesses of all kinds. So that should be a fun one, and it'll be very no BS. We'll talk through good and bad in our business day to day and lessons learned. And so yeah, tune in. Should be a good one.
That's fantastic. And where can it be found? Is it Apple Podcasts, Spotify?
Yes, it will be on all the major platforms. And then we'll find many links to it on any of my socials.
Fantastic. And last question, Dan, what is the best way to get in contact with you, find your company, invest with you, learn more about what you do? Give me all those links.
Yeah, Dan Haberkost on Facebook, Instagram, or just danhaberkost.com.
Fantastic, folks. And as usual, that will be for your clicking pleasure right down in the show notes on whatever modality or even TikTok that you're watching this on. So check it out. And Dan, thank you for coming on the show. This is not what I expected. This is a totally different niche of generating, we can call it land investing or generating revenue off of land, as you mentioned. Thank you for talking about the niche, educating our audience, and I hope to have you back on the call soon.
Thanks for having me, Chad.
We hope this episode was insightful and brought value to your day. If so, please be awesome and leave us a 5-star review. Find out how Team Quattro can help you at thequattroway.com. Until next time, this is the Real Estate Runway Podcast.